Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really sinking our teeth into Jacinda Ardern's world, specifically looking at her book, A Different Kind of Power.
Yeah, we've been digging into interviews where she discusses writing it, looks back on her time leading New Zealand, and, talks about life afterwards.
Right, so our mission today is really to pull out the key themes from these conversations. What's her unique perspective on leadership?
What were those big challenges she wrestled with, both the internal stuff and the external pressures?
And ultimately, what's the core message she's trying to get across by sharing her experiences in this particular way?
And you mentioned the book, the dedication itself is quite something, isn't it?
It really is. Dedicated to criers, worriers, and huggers. I mean, that immediately tells you this isn't your standard political memoir.
No, not at all. It signals right away this intention to challenge some, pretty ingrained ideas about what political strength looks like.
It's a fascinating starting point.
It really is, because it sets the stage for her main argument. She's very clear this isn't about policy wins or like a day-by-day account of legislation. It's framed more as a personal story of the experience of leading. What did it actually feel like, the human side of being in that position?
Which feels really important, doesn't it? She was a big part of why she wrote it was just to humanize the role, especially in politics.
Yeah, and maybe even more crucial, to encourage people who perhaps feel they don't fit that conventional, often quite aggressive political mold.
Like those who might think they're, too sensitive or something.
Exactly, to encourage them to still consider public life, which leads right into that core idea, a different kind of power.
Okay, so what does she mean by that exactly?
Well, her argument is essentially that qualities often dismissed as, soft things like compassion, empathy, maybe even vulnerability are actually really profound sources of strength in leadership.
So she's pushing back against that common idea that being empathetic means you're weak or indecisive.
Totally pushing back. She argues that being empathetic doesn't mean you lack resilience. In fact, she suggests the opposite.
But isn't that the narrative we usually hear? That you have to be tough, almost ruthless sometimes, to make it in politics?
Oh, absolutely. That's the dominant view, and she knows it. But she argues that actually leaning into empathy takes a different kind of courage.
How so?
Well, it means being willing to be open to other people's pain, right? Allowing yourself to actually be affected by it, and then using that feeling to drive action. That, she thinks, is where real strength lies.
Does she give examples of seeing this? Not just in herself.
Yeah, she does. She talks about seeing it in others, including men in her government. There's this quite powerful story about her finance minister, who later became deputy PM. During the COVID lockdowns, he was apparently visibly distraught after reading letters from small business owners who were really struggling.
Wow.
Yeah, he wasn't just processing data points. He was genuinely moved, And that emotional response immediately spurred him to find policy solutions to help those specific people.
So the empathy wasn't a weakness, it was the motivator.
Exactly. It was the engine for his action. But she also feels the current political system doesn't always spotlight or incentivize that style.
Like it doesn't make space for it.
Sort of. She thinks there's often a disconnect between the kind of leadership people might actually be looking for and what typically gets presented or rewarded in politics.
Which brings us back to that dedication. Criers, worriers, and huggers. Putting that front and center feels quite deliberate.
Oh, it's absolutely deliberate. It's like she's intentionally bringing vulnerability, emotion, humility into this space that often tries to, sanitize those things away.
It's an act of normalization almost.
Yes, saying these human parts, they belong here too. She finds it quite telling that just stating kindness as a guiding principle in politics can be seen as naive or weak.
Whereas for her, it's actually brave.
It's a courageous act, yeah, because it directly challenges that ingrained assumption about toughness being the only way.
She makes this point that seems so obvious when you hear it.
About the values we teach kids.
Exactly. Kindness, generosity, curiosity, bravery. Why do we suddenly stop expecting those from our leaders? Why accept a lower standard?
It's a really powerful question, and she connects this to what she sees as the old, maybe harmful tools of politics, like using fear and blame.
Right, advocating for more optimism, more inclusion instead.
Yes, and linking it directly to this need to rehumanize each other, especially now with so much polarization and disinformation,
That binary us versus them thinking.
which she sees as incredibly dangerous. Dehumanizing the other can be a precursor to violence, she suggests. You can tell this view comes from leading through some really extreme events.
Let's maybe pivot then. Talk a bit about her background. What shaped these views early on?
Well, she grew up in a small rural town called Murupata, not exactly a political hub.
Right.
Her parents had very, down-to-earth jobs. Her dad was a police officer. Her mom worked in the school cafeteria.
And she was the first in her family to go to university.
Her and her sister, yeah. So definitely not from a background steeped in politics. And she says her motivation wasn't the sort of competitive sport of it all.
It was more about service.
A really deep sense of service. She remembers this specific moment from childhood, seeing a boy in Murupata with her sister who was obviously cold and hungry.
Mm.
And experiences like that, seeing unfairness firsthand, seemed to have sparked something. Plus, her home environment was very service-oriented. Politics, done right, was seen as an act of service.
That makes sense. And her father's approach to policing that sounds like an early influence, too.
Absolutely. A huge one, it seems. She learned from him that the most effective tool wasn't force, it was words.
Building trust and dignity.
Exactly. Even in tough situations, that was like her first lesson in finding strength through communication and empathy, not just authority, which is probably why she initially saw herself working behind the scenes.
Yeah, she didn't picture herself being front of house, as she put it.
Which is quite something, given her global profile later on. And speaking of her internal world, she's remarkably open about self-doubt, imposter syndrome.
She really is. Describes it as something she's dealt with her whole life, even worried early on she was just too thin-skinned for politics.
And you can see why someone might feel that way, right? It's such a brutal arena sometimes.
Which she got some key advice, didn't she? From Trevor Mellard.
Yeah, a senior colleague who told her basically, don't lose that sensitivity, don't lose the thin skin, the empathy.
And that helped her reframe it.
It seems like it did. Helped her see it not as a weakness to get rid of, but as part of who she was and actually the source of her empathy, her motivation to do right by people.
So the thin skin was proof she cared deeply.
Proof she was connected to the impact of her decisions, a different kind of power, again, and she even found a way to channel the imposter syndrome.
How did that work?
Well, because she was constantly questioning if she was really up to the job, it made her incredibly diligent.
Ah, so it drove her to overprepare.
Exactly. To consult experts constantly, gather all the information she could, that humility, being willing to say, I don't know everything, and relying on others' expertise, that became a real strength.
Made her more thorough, more collaborative, maybe?
Yeah. And she tells this really touching story about a young girl she met.
The one who wanted to be a doctor.
That's the one. But the girl thought she'd end up as a travel agent because she just assumed someone else would be better at being a doctor.
Wow. It speaks to how we limit ourselves, doesn't it?
Totally. Based on these internal doubts. And that's why Ardern feels it's important to talk about her own confidence struggles openly.
To kind of give other people permission to aim high, even if they feel that doubt.
Exactly. To show you can battle those feelings and still achieve amazing things.
Okay, another huge element of her story, very public, was becoming a mother while in office. The timing was pretty wild.
Unbelievably wild. Finding out she was pregnant right in the middle of those intense coalition talks after the election, literally days before she might become prime minister.
And she kept it quiet at first.
Yeah, for the usual early pregnancy reasons, but also, the sheer political sensitivity of negotiating a government and having just become party leader.
She even mentions having really bad morning sickness on the day she was sworn in as PM.
Can you imagine? Trying to manage that huge moment while feeling awful?
And she faced some pretty inappropriate questions early on, too, didn't she? About her plans for having children.
She did, and she was very firm about it, stated clearly that those kinds of questions are unacceptable for any woman in any job. Took a real stand.
And she was only the second world leader ever to give birth in office. She even asked the Queen for advice.
Apparently so, and the Queen's advice was just, you just get on with it. Very practical.
Very practical. But Ardern does admit that while she got on with it, the juggle got harder as her daughter Neve got older. She felt what she was missing.
Yeah, that famous photo of her with Neve at the UN General Assembly, it became this incredibly powerful symbol, even though it wasn't planned that way. It just sort of normalized leaders being mothers on that global stage.
And she's open about the less glamorous side, too. Breastfeeding struggles, time zones with a baby.
Yeah, trying to show the universal parts of parenting, to humanize it. But she's also crystal clear, and she really emphasizes this.
That leaving wasn't because being a mother and PM was too hard.
Exactly. She absolutely did not want her daughter, or any other women, to get that message. She stresses that mom guilt is universal, whatever your job.
Her point is more about the support needed.
Yes, that women can do both, but the focus needs to be on the village, the support systems, and crucially, partners sharing the load equally, not setting up some impossible superwoman standard.
Right. Beyond the personal, though, she led through some absolutely immense national crises. Christchurch and COVID are the big ones.
Christchurch, March 2019, just horrific. She describes hearing about the attack and immediately understanding the attacker's motive from his manifesto.
That his goal was specifically to sow division.
Yes. And the response she led felt like a deliberate, powerful rejection of that. Uniting the country, embracing the Muslim community. They are us.
She talks about needing to be there, on the ground.
Crucial for her. Visiting the police, the hospitals, getting that proximity to feel the urgency, especially the need to speed up victim identification for burials, understanding the religious importance.
And the speed of the legislative response on guns was remarkable. 10 days.
10 days to change the laws and start a buyback. She said seeing the injuries in the hospital, multiple gunshot wounds, just solidified for her, and she believed for the country the need to ban those military-style weapons. Her gut feeling was New Zealanders would back it.
And they did.
Overwhelmingly. A moment where that empathetic leadership led directly to swift action.
Then came COVID. A totally different beast, global, long-lasting.
Yeah, and governing through that meant relentless pressure. Not just the virus, but the disinformation, the protests, the anger, the threats.
The weight of those life and death decisions.
Immense. She talks about their early strategy being transparency, sharing what they knew, but also being honest about what they didn't know.
That decision to close borders early, aiming to save lives.
Which estimates suggest saved around 20,000 lives. And New Zealand actually spent less time in lockdowns than many places, but still, it created deep divisions.
She reflects on how hard it is to judge those decisions in hindsight, right?
Yeah.
Made with imperfect info, tough trade-offs.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And she shares the personal cost, feeling disoriented by the sheer toxicity online, the conspiracy theories, seeing communication break down, needing sleeping pills just to cope with the stress.
Must have been incredibly isolating.
She says she held on to knowing her motivation, trying to do the right thing even when accused of power plays. But she acknowledges how hard that period was and the healing still needed.
Which sort of leads into her decision to step down, saying she didn't have enough in the tank.
Yeah, not enough to keep being the kind of leader she felt the job required. It wasn't one thing, no big scandal.
She wanted to normalize leaving simply because you can't give it what it needs anymore.
Right. Without it having to be some dramatic failure. She talks about how hard that is for politicians' team pressure, the loneliness of the call, not wanting to let people down.
And the impact of COVID, feeling like she'd become a flashpoint.
Yes, carrying that baggage, hoping her leaving might lower the political temperature a bit.
And she mentions a personal health scare, a breast lump scare, not as the reason, but maybe a trigger.
Like it gave her permission to finally consider it after feeling like her sense of responsibility had locked her in for so long.
Allowed her to listen to the signs.
Exactly. Signs like her curiosity fading, becoming more defensive, knowing she lacked the reserves for the next crisis. She framed it as a responsibility to hand over to someone who had that energy.
A different perspective on leaving power.
And she says despite how hard and lonely it felt, she's never regretted it.
So life after politics.
Yeah.
What's the focus now?
Well, obviously a huge shift in pace first. She said writing the book was almost like therapy with a deadline, a way to process it all.
Makes sense. And her main work now is setting up this new fellowship.
Yeah, the Fellowship for Empathetic Leadership field. The goal is to support and connect others in politics or public life who believe in and practice that empathetic style.
Building a network, showing it can work.
Exactly. Demonstrating that this different kind of power isn't just nice theory, it can be effective and successful.
So looking back at this deep dive into her book and reflections, it really does challenge that old script of political leadership, doesn't it?
It really does. That core idea, empathy, vulnerability, kindness as strengths, not weaknesses. It's a powerful counter-narrative.
And being so open about self-doubt, imposter syndrome, the motherhood juggle, it just humanizes the whole thing. Shows leadership doesn't mean losing your humanity.
Absolutely. And her experiences leading through Christchurch and COVID, they underline the immense personal toll, the messy reality of making those huge decisions under fire.
And even her exit, framed by self-awareness, not failure, offers a different model for how political careers can end.
It all circles back to that message from a different kind of power, that a more empathetic, service-focused approach is possible, maybe even necessary now.
Yeah. And building on her call to, rehumanize politics and society, especially with all the division and noise she faced, it leaves you with a question, doesn't it?
It does. Beyond just the leaders, it makes you think.
Right? Considering the values she talks about, the challenges of connection, what specific things can you do in your own life, your interactions, your community?
Maybe choosing curiosity over judgment sometimes. Seeking understanding instead of just disagreement.
Exactly. How can you yourself cultivate a bit more empathy and contribute to fostering that different kind of power right where you are, not just in lofty leadership roles?